Penn State football is absolutely killing it for the class of 2024, and they've had a lot of success in the Midwest. But is it a fluke? I'm not buying that. And there's actually a particular reason why Penn State has done so well with recruiting out in the Midwest.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks so much for making Locked On Nittany Lions your first listen and watch every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And Penn State Rivals is your place to go to for everything Penn State athletics, now partnered, of course, with Locked On Nittany Lions here. So HappyValleyInsider.com is your home for everything Penn State athletics, and your go-to podcast is Locked On Nittany Lions. My name is Zach Seyko, your host, and I'm joined by Clint Cosgrove, National Recruiting Analyst for both Rivals and Yahoo Sports, joining me on this episode because we got a lot to talk about as far as Penn State's recruiting success out in the Midwest. Clint, thank you so much for the time today. Where can people keep up with your work before we move any further?
Well, you can find me on, at rivals.com. I'm one of the national analysts, so all of my content goes on the front page there, and then it's picked up by the individual team sites. I'm pretty active on Twitter, so you see it right there, _Clint. Instagram is the same, rivals_Clint. But yeah, I put out a ton of content from podcasts, videos, written, whatever it may be. I have a new feature coming out today called From the Film Room, where I'll sit down and break down the film of top recruit and talk about what makes them special. So you can find me a little bit everywhere, but mostly at rivals.com, and then some stuff with Yahoo Sports.
Perfect. You're the guy that is going to be the expert in this case because Penn State, I mean, particularly in Wisconsin, right, has had recent success for the class of 2024. And a little bit further back, because we're going to talk about a Kailyn King, who's going to be an NFL prospect, was an intriguing high school prospect not too long ago out of Michigan, and now is in that NFL conversation, which you had a recent article about. But let's start with Donovan Harbour, Garrett Sexton, Corey Smith, all those guys. It's just in particular, why do you believe that Penn State has done so well in the Wisconsin area? I have my reasons, I have my opinions, but I want to go back and forth about this. What do you believe has led to the success and potentially more coming out of that state and then just the Midwest region for 2024 recruiting?
Yeah, I think it's a multifaceted answer, and there's no direct answer. There's a lot of different speculation and as to why I think this happened. But I think it started not just this year, but the seeds were kind of planted in years past. Wisconsin for the longest time, especially under Barry Alvarez and then, Bielema, they locked down the state. There was pretty much a border around the state. And in state recruiting, it was a priority. You didn't lose anybody. Then as things started to wane on the recruiting front under Paul Chris, fantastic coach, a lot of success. I think the recruiting is probably what did him in. And, it fell off a little. They lost two of the top three prospects in the state, I believe, last year. And these are big time players like Carson Hintzman, who's already has a redshirt freshman slotted as the number one center on the offensive line. You think Wisconsin, you think offensive line. So to lose a player like that. So that fence around the state isn't necessarily, it's got some holes in it right now. And then you have a new transition of a new staff, and they're still learning the lay of the land, the importance of keeping players home. I know they're going to make it an effort moving forward. But Penn State and the coaches there, they've had the advantage of recruiting Wisconsin, and Wisconsin players are at least being familiar with the area, especially with their efforts in Detroit and Chicagoland as well. Where, they had a little better understanding probably of the lay of the land. And then, so you got new staff, with that comes new priorities. Yes, you do want to lock down the state. In order to be a championship caliber team at Wisconsin, you do have to keep the best players home, because you're not going to go into Georgia and take their top talent, just like a Georgia can come to Wisconsin and take who they want. So, it's multifaceted. I think Wisconsin, it'll be a slow burn, but they're doing a great job on the recruiting trail, and they'll work towards locking down that state. But when they came in, there's a couple of different variables here. Donovan Harbour was not a kid that they had recruited at Cincinnati. It wasn't a guy that they went all in on right away. In the meantime, there was a lot of big time programs that, were in on them, including Penn State and ultimately Penn State. And so as they were getting their bearings, that allowed some opportunity, I think, for a school like Penn State, who has had some success, most recently with Jerry Cross, who's from Milwaukee, in, I believe, the 23 class. Might have been 22. I'm getting old. I don't
22,
know.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So there was that base there. There was that experience there, the relationships there. And then they took advantage of the situation and went in and took some very good players for the state. Corey Smith, I'm sure he is a take at Wisconsin all day, any day. His good friend Donovan Harbour goes out to Penn State. They both had a relationship a little bit with Jerry Cross as well. They're from the same area, even though Jerry did not go to the private school, Waukesha Catholic Memorial, the same as they did, but they did have a relationship with them. And then the other Midwest kids there, if they are going to go away from home, I think there's two very comforting elements to Penn State. One, it's in the Big Ten. They grew up watching Penn State. If they were a Wisconsin fan, they saw Penn State. And then, two, there's already a group of guys from their region that they can connect with and have a little taste of home there. So I think both of that helps. And then I remember the first time I walked onto that field at Penn State, and I remember just looking up and being like, this is insane. 107,000 people, white out. Now, this was back, Joe Pa was the coach. I was like, it reminded me of walking into the Coliseum in the movie Gladiator, and that always stuck with me as an incredible environment. So I think it checks a lot of the boxes for these Midwest kids, and the game day environment and the effort that they put into recruiting on top of that. It's kind of the perfect storm to land these big time recruits out of Wisconsin.
Yeah, they've had three so far, Corey Smith and Donnie Harbour, as you mentioned, and then Garrett Sexton, too. So two offensive linemen and the one running back. I think, and I agree wholeheartedly with the part in the conversation we had beforehand leading up to, us joining on the podcast here, Clint, is that Luke Fickell, who's now the head coach at Wisconsin, there were all those changes and there was a little bit of vulnerability, right? You said particularly that Fickell didn't recruit them at Cincinnati, and that's fine. That's not a place that he was targeting. But in this case, there's not really that familiarity yet that you mentioned that Fickell and this staff have to get used to and being able to connect with Wisconsin. They were focused on Ohio, which makes perfect sense. Franklin and them, they saw a weakness and they took advantage of that. They knew that Wisconsin's recruiting was going to be a little down just with the transition. Even though Paul Chryst was fired midseason, it was still that regime change from Chryst to Fickell that opened the door for just about anybody to go into Wisconsin and recruit some of those top tier guys. And Penn State just happens to, no mercy from James Franklin, right? He sees a vulnerability. Never. And he took full advantage of that because all is fair and love in recruiting wars in this case.
No question. They did a great job. They picked their spot and they were very efficient in doing so.
It is Locked On Nittany Lions. We're talking some Penn State recruiting, class of 2024 and beyond, really, just with how they're doing in the Midwest. Clint and I are going to discuss some other prospects, including the three from Wisconsin for 2024, but there is some intrigue around some other guys as well that Penn State could be in on. But before we get to that and Kailyn King and how he projects as an NFL prospect, let's hear from our sponsor of today's episode, and that is Built. Are you looking for a delicious snack, but you don't want all of the sugar and calories? Totally understand, because you need to try the best tasting protein bar out there, and that is Built. If you're like me, where you want to make healthier snack choices, but you don't want to compromise on all the taste, I've got the thing for you. It's Built Bars and Built Puffs. Built Bars are healthy and they taste amazing. Seriously, they're so amazing you won't think that they are good for you. You got to try them. Now, what makes Built Bars so good? Well, for starters, they're covered in 100% real chocolate. That is right, real dark chocolate. And they come in unbelievably tasty flavors: churro, peanut butter brownie, and cookies and cream. I'm really not sure how Built does it, but these bars taste like a candy bar while maintaining amazing macros. And what's even better is that they are healthy for you. Only 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, and a whopping 17 grams of protein. And now you don't need to wait around to get a box anymore. For years, we've been telling you to go to Built built.com. And you can still do that. You can go get your specialty flavors at built.com, but now you can go to Walmart or Sam's Club. So if you're near a Walmart, go to the pharmacy section and grab yourself a box of Built Bars. You can pick up a 4-bar box of cookies and cream, double chocolate bar, or coconut puff. And if you're close to a Sam's Club run-in, grab a 13-bar box with hit flavors like brownie batter puff and churro puff. You can thank me later. And thanks again so much for making Locked On Nittany Lions your first listen and watch every single day. More's coming up on the podcast, of course. Basketball, the changes that are going on. Penn State losing out on some key figures. Got to discuss that and how they're going to continue to fill out the roster. Also missing on some key recruits as well. But Penn State football, not really so much missing on those recruits. And that's why we bring in a person like Clint Cosgrove to talk about just that. Your impressions when Penn State lands, there's so much that can be said for guys like Garrett Sexton, Corey Smith, and Donovan Harbour, but just what is your brief impression for all three of them together to join this Penn State class of 2024? What kind of impact together can they have, Clint?
Together, I think they can be very good. They're both, not both, they're all high upside kids, and they each bring something different to the table. As a group, there's no sure things in recruiting. You can do your research, you can do your evaluations. But these are at the same time, they're kids, they get homesick. If they aren't given an opportunity right away, sometimes that hits hard. And so there's a lot of variables, but each of them has a chance to be, all Big Ten caliber players, in my opinion. I'll start with Corey Smith, the running back. He's just a heck of a back. And, he can hit the home run. He has great vision. He's a patient runner, great laterally. His burst is fantastic, and his balance as well. And the other thing you like about him is he can be a 3-down back. Now, he's a little thin right now, so he's going to have to work on pass pro and stuff like that, but he can catch the ball, and he's at full speed at a few steps. So you really like his upside. When I was getting ready to do his commitment interview, I was just going through his Twitter and looking at some things just to make sure I had all the facts right before we filmed. And there was one play that Bally's, Wisconsin put on there from the state championship game, where he hits the hole and he is running hard, and then he gets wrapped up at the second level. He manages to spin out of it. There's another guy there to tackle him, and he just outruns everybody. So again, you talk about the acceleration from getting tackled to breaking into the tackle to keeping his balance to hitting the home run and ultimately scoring a touchdown. Those are the type of things that you can expect from him. I think he does have the ability to carve out an early role. Now, is he going to be your 3-down starting back right away? No. I mean, that takes time in the Big Ten, and not many people can take that beating, just fresh out of high school as well. And although he does have good size, he's a little slight right now. He's going to be huge once he gets in a college weight program, and I expect him to maintain all of his athletic ability, speed, and everything like that. So he's got a chance to be very good. Now, his teammate, Donovan Harbour, is a guy that he's an upside play. He's a big guy, and he can move. He can move. He's a technician, but at the same time, he's very raw in his development. And I don't mean that in a bad way, because he's a very good player right now, but he's just raw in terms of what he can eventually be. And when you're recruiting, that's what you're looking for. You're not recruiting the guy who is this guy now. You're not expecting a freshman offensive lineman unless they are an absolute physical freak to come in and play right away. So when you look at him as a developmental prospect and you look at his upside, his feet, his athleticism, his frame, he's got that prototypical interior frame, interior body. He can do a little bit of everything. He can zone block, gap scheme stuff, does well in pass pro. He's another guy that getting in that weight program, getting in that meal program, he'll shed a little weight, and I think he'll be a much better player because of it. He's, like I said, he's already athletic at the size he's at, but if he could get a little more muscle, trim a little more fat, and really maximize his skill set, that would enable him to maximize his skill set. That's where you see the upside with him. And then, Sexton, the other one, he's a guy that, kind of an undersized player, but, very long and incredible upside. I'm one of those guys when I was recruiting. I like the tight end converts, the guys who are 6'7", maybe 235, 240 pounds coming out of high school, because they have the athleticism and they're not going to lose that, especially if they're a wide frame guy who can add plenty of mass without really, becoming stiff and all of that. Those guys with those frames, they tend to keep their athleticism, and then the weight is going to come with time. So when you look at him athletically, lengthwise, what he can be when he's a finished product, I mean, I think as far as offensive line goes, Harbour's the better player right now, but he has as much or more upside than Harbour does. And I think his versatility, he can end up being a bookend tackle, but he could also, flip inside. He could be an interior guy with the added weight. So there's just so much to like about him as well. Now, his recruitment was different. A lot of people, they questioned the size. They worried about that. It was a slow burn, and then it kind of blew up. I believe Wisconsin did not actually extend an offer until after he announced either a top list or that he would be committing. So they were late to the party. Now, they would not have offered if they didn't feel strongly about his upside and his ability. So I think that's one that they definitely wanted. It was just a little too late. I understand that from Wisconsin's standpoint as well, because you can either do things the quick way or you can get settled. You can do things the way you have done, a proven path to success like they had at Cincinnati, and not rush things and still not have it be a detriment to your long-term recruiting needs. But would they like to have these guys? Absolutely. Penn State did a fantastic job swooping in. And, those are three guys who have NFL upside.
Wow. Penn State really got some guys out of the Midwest here. And again, on Locked On Nittany Lions, of course, we're going to continue to talk about these types of the recruiting news that's going to come out towards the summer here. And of course, Penn State men's basketball. And Locked On Nittany Lions, now your go-to podcast for Penn State rivals. Visit happyvalleyinsider.com for everything Penn State athletics. Again, I'm Zach Seyko, your host as always, joined by Clint Cosgrove from Rivals and Yahoo Sports. And since Penn State has already, they've gone into Wisconsin particularly. And yes, again, Kailyn King, we're going to finish up with, and just, he's somebody that, of course, with his brother, Kobe King, they got from Michigan. But then you also have other guys that they're interested in for 2024, 2025. Clint, what insight do you have? Again, National Recruiting Analyst, so you're the person to talk to read your articles when it comes to these kinds of things. So who are some of the other intriguing players right now that Penn State has a lean on? Maybe there's someone that they're extremely confident that they could get at the end of the day out of that Midwest area, whether it is just Wisconsin, again, if the Badgers are failing at this, or any other neighboring states like a Michigan.
Yeah. I think there's only so many prospects in Wisconsin on a yearly basis. This is actually probably a one of the more talented classes that Wisconsin has had in a couple of years from the state. And so I don't know how many more that they could wrangle in unless they flip a kid who's already committed to Wisconsin. So I think you really look towards Michigan, where they've had a ton of success in the past. I mean, you've got Kari Jackson committed, who's going to be a heck of a player, sideline to sideline defender. You talk about Kailyn King, another Detroit guy. So there's that pipeline there. They've done an excellent job recruiting it over the years. And, there's two guys in the 24 class who I think Penn State is at least in on, if not towards the top of the list. And the first being Nicholas Marsh. They call him, Baby Tron, just like Charles Johnson, the old Lions receiver who played at Georgia Tech.
Calvin Johnson.
Calvin Johnson. I got mixed up with Charles Rogers, another Michigan guy. So, but just a fantastic player, physical specimen, extremely, extremely polished, great ball skills. Was just with him. He was at our Cincinnati Rivals camp, not this past weekend, but the weekend before. Phenomenal job there. He was originally committed to Michigan State. He's a top 70 player in the nation, one of the best available receivers, one of the best receivers, period, in the nation. And I don't know if this has been formally announced, but he will be visiting. I think the first official visit that he's taking is to Penn State on June 9th. So that is one to keep a close eye on. He's got 3 scheduled right now. I think they'll end up with 5 total. But Penn State's looking good here. Another kid, the connections from Detroit. Every time I interview a recruit that has Penn State on their list from the Detroit area, they speak of the guys who have gone there and the success that they've had, and that really sticks out to them. So there's a built-in pipeline there. The kids are close in that community. They're recruiting each other. So, Nick Marsh is definitely one to watch. Jeremiah Beasley, another 4-star linebacker, kind of in the mold of Kari Jackson, sideline to sideline guy. Kid plays running back as well. Heck of a player. Now, he had dropped, I believe it was a top 7 or something like that, and then announced a commitment date. And then shortly after announcing all of that, both Colorado and Penn State came in. Now, the last time I did an interview with him, he said that Colorado and Penn State would be players in his recruitment. I don't know the latest. I don't know what Penn State's linebacker board looks like right now as far as what they're looking to take in addition to what they have. But he is a guy that is extremely intriguing. And I know, Penn State is a place of interest for him. Satterwhite, offensive lineman out of Ohio, fantastic player. SEC offers from coast to coast. He's been out to Penn State at least once, if not a couple times. I know he is high on Penn State. There was a rumor at one point that he was going to commit to Penn State. So that's a one to keep an eye on. And then there's a guy named Davon Hall. Now, we have him as a 4-star receiver, and his offer list doesn't match that of a typical 4-star receiver. I think a part of that is, he hasn't been all over the place. He hasn't been really dialed into the recruitment. He's a big track guy. He's a high jumper, but this kid is a physical specimen in the same type of mold as Nick Marsh. And his name's Davon Hall. He's out of Nebraska. Now, I don't know how many Nebraska players have played at Penn State or are currently on the Penn State roster, but I recently saw him at a pylon 7-on-7 tournament. And my big question is he the 4-star that I think he is, or am I missing something? And he proved to be everything that I hoped he would be and more. Incredible body control, ball skills, can do it all. And like I said, a big body guy. So it'll be interesting to see what Penn State's pursuit is of him. But he spoke glowingly of Penn State, was excited to get out there. And he's another one that I would keep an eye on in the 2024 class, not necessarily in your Illinois, Wisconsin, Michigan kind of Midwest, but down there in the plains, touching the Midwest.
Yeah, and I think that would be huge to at least start some traction for Marcus Hagen. So the same thing that I criticized Luke Fickell for, right? And the new Wisconsin coaching staff about not having its footing yet. I feel like Marcus Hagens, if he can start there with his recruiting impressions, since he's been in Virginia for so long, and to get prospects like that will go a long way, because it feels like, yes, there were the guys like a Chris Godwin and Allen Robinson, at least in the past decade, that really wowed for Penn State wide receivers. But that bona fide, he's a first rounder, he's going to go top 20. I feel like Penn State hasn't exactly had that in quite some time, at least at wide receiver, right? There's been the running backs, and then Joey Porter Jr. was in that conversation and slid on draft day. But for Marcus Hagens, I think that would be at least a good start for his recruiting at that position. And then there's Kailyn King, right? You just recently wrote an article about all these things, dissecting some things with Michigan. We're not going to talk about Michigan. We're not going to talk about the Wolverines on this podcast. This is the Nittany Lions show. But I encourage people to go check out your article, Clint, because part of it is looking at the Midwest prospects currently in college that will be potential first-round picks in the NFL. And one of them, because he's from Michigan, Kailyn King. I like Kailyn King a lot. I have said kind of quietly in the back, because Joey Porter Jr. was getting a lot of the notoriety since he was supposed to be the first cornerback in Penn State history to be a surefire first-rounder. Depending on how you want to split some hairs, he was picked at 32. Any other time, that's a first-round pick, but we know what happened with the Miami Dolphins situation. Yeah. But then, but Kailyn King, I like just the past, at least I want to say in 2022 and a little bit at the end of 2021, I said, hey, over here, Kailyn King might end up being better than Joey Porter Jr. So do you agree? Do you think there's a little bit more work for him to do? Can Kailyn King be potentially a top, what is he, a top 20, a top 15, a top 10 in your mind? What helps him out so much that he can be that type of NFL prospect? And then where ultimately do you think he could land in the first round, since that is part of the article, which players from the Midwest will go in the first round?
Yeah. Another Michigan guy that's had success.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about receivers, and you think about the most recent receiver to get drafted reasonably high, KJ Hamler, another guy from Michigan. So the ties are deep there. So the thing that stands out about him, so with Joey Porter, Joey's a physical specimen. You know what I mean? Like, he's the dude who that's what you want your secondary to look like in the NFL. Why he dropped, I don't know. Technically, he's not a first rounder, while technically being a first rounder, or at least being the 32nd pick. But I do think that King probably has more. I'm not saying upside as a player, but I think he has more draft upside going into this next season. And the reason I say this is his ability to cover. He is a lockdown coverage corner. I loved him coming out of high school. He was a little slight, but he was a very good player. Yeah. Goes to Penn State. Now, the first year was significant time, 2021, had its ups and downs. Played 279 snaps. He had a 66.4 PFF grade, which is okay for a young player, not great. He only had 135 coverage snaps. Only gave up 6 receptions on 20 targets that year. So, I mean, all that stuff's pretty good. But then you look into 2022. Excuse me. Sorry, I get fired up when talking about this stuff. He made an incredible transformation. So his first year seeing significant action was almost like an extension of his high school. You're still getting rid of those bad habits. You're still growing physically. You're still developing mentally to understand and be able to handle the vigors that come with playing at the high college level. Well, he's obviously put in the work, because he took that 66.4 grade and made it an 89 overall grade in terms of both run and pass from 21 to 22. So that's a significant increase. Then you want to talk about his coverage grade, and it was of guys who will be draft eligible next year. He had the second highest coverage grade, only to a guy at Toledo. So not exactly going up against the same level of competition. But Kailyn King's coverage grade was a 90.6. His coverage percentage, 99.2%. Now, this is all coming from Pro Football Focus. But in the 59 times he was targeted, and that doesn't seem, a lot of lockdown corners don't get targeted a ton. But when you had Joey Porter there, they had to go somewhere else.
You had to.
So for him to get, And so for him to get targeted that little, I think it says a lot about what other teams thought of him. And then what he did with those targets, those 59 targets only turned into 27 receptions. Now, the 45.8 reception percentage isn't necessarily elite. There's a lot that goes into this than just, the grade on a play from Pro Football Focus. We don't know if a guy made a spectacular catch. We don't know what's going on with all of that. But what we do know is he was extremely productive. And he had 3 interceptions. I believe he turned 1 for a touchdown. So the things that we saw in high school, the things we saw flashes of, you kind of mentioned towards the end of the 21 season, really just came full circle in 22. And he was locked down. I mean, 343 yards total receiving he gave up on 59 targets. I mean, that's pretty darn good. The other thing that I like about him too, and this tells you that he's a smart player, he's always in phase, is his longest pass that he gave up was 37 yards. Yes, that's a chunk play, but that tells you that he's a smart player. He's not letting things get over the top of him. He understands defense. He understands leverage. And then he's got the coverage ability to go with it. He's extremely fluid in the hips. He can outrun. He's not afraid to get physical. He's not a huge corner, but he's got good size. He's in that 5'11", 188, 190 pound range. But to me, what really sticks out is his coverage ability. The NFL is a man coverage league. Not everybody's playing at every snap, but he's a guy who can walk in there and cover a number one receiver day one. And the other thing you like about him, even though he doesn't play a lot of slot corner right now, he does have that skill set where he'll be able to. He does line up in the box occasionally. So when you've got a guy who can, line up in the box and has the want to, and can hold up physically against the run game, and then also cover, which is the hardest receiver to cover in the NFL in many cases, the slot receiver. Those guys are catching 100 balls. For him to be able to put him on an island, that is a very, very valuable player, especially when he's got the willingness and the ability to be an extra run defender and fold in if he needs to. So to me, there's just so much upside. I was a defensive backs coach at the college level for 7-8 years, and I take pride in my DB evaluations. I am not an NFL draft analyst by any sense of the word, but from what I've seen out there, he's got to be a top 3 corner. Corners are going to be, you've got like Kool-Aid McKinstry and guys like that, but guys who can cover like Kailyn, who can run like Kailyn, who can play on special teams, they come at a premium. So I could see him going as high as maybe number 10 down to, number 20, just as things are today. That's assuming his development remains the same. He remains productive. And there's a chance he gets targeted even less next year. So sometimes that can woe you to sleep, and all of a sudden there's a chunk play over your head. So I think it'll say a lot about how dialed in he is to the game, with how he responds to probably the limited amount of targets that he's going to get next season. So as things are today, and just projecting wise, skill set, upside, looking at what else is out there, I see him in the 10 to 20 range, but so much can change between now and the next draft.
Clint, this was a lot of fun. Clint Cosgrove over at Rivals and Yahoo Sports. Clint, before I let you go, where can people keep up with your incredible work?
Go to rivals.com and go to rivals_Clint on Twitter. That's where I'm most active. I've got weekly features, whether it be, fact or fiction, 3-point stance. I do recruiting updates. I oversee the Midwest, so I'm the national analyst for Rivals. We break that up by region. I oversee the Midwest. So a lot of the guys that Penn State is in on right now and is landing right now are guys that I'm very familiar with. And if you want to see my work, it's all on rivals.com, or you can just Google Rivals Clint, and you usually find a decent amount of content.
And if Penn State continues its dominance out in the Midwest, hopefully we can have a conversation like this again in the not too distant future, Clint. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a ton for having me on. I had a blast and would love to come on again.